Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Sorry, forgot that stuff. Um, I'm Laura Nazaro. I'm with the Rutgers Center for Ocean Observing Leadership. And today I'm going to present on behalf of Are You Cool and the University of Delaware Orb Lab on gliders detecting fish in the Mid-Atlantic Bight. So I'll start by explaining what a glider is, and then talk about what glider data typically looks like, how we get tag detections from our gliders, where we are deploying gliders with receivers, and then what coverage we have planned for the future, and how glider-based detections have been used in the past, and how we can use glider-based detections in the future. Can you see the whole slide? Because you're not seeing like your own faces, right?
No.
Okay. So what is a glider? A glider is an autonomous underwater vehicle that looks like a torpedo. A lot of people think they are torpedoes. They're obviously not. Um, they work by buoyancy. So when they're at the surface, the diaphragm decreases volume in the nose and the glider descends. And then when it's near the bottom, it increases its volume by adding air and it moves back up. Um, so it flies in a nope, sorry. It flies in a sawtooth pattern and collects environmental data while it's doing that. And then every few hours or so, it surfaces, its tail pops up, it acquires GPS, and then it sends that data back to shore via satellite. So glider data, we can collect all sorts of different environmental features. Every glider we deploy has a CTD, but several of them also have sensors measuring chlorophyll, CDOM, different backscatter, dissolved oxygen. We have some that measure pH. We have some sensors that measure underwater currents. Um, they're like constantly developing new types of sensors, which is really cool. Um, and we have a web page online. I can send that link if you want it that shows some of the images for the data that's coming back in real time and links to publicly available data sets that include all that environmental data we're collecting. So this is an example. You have that sawtooth pattern and it's really condensed here, but it's basically you get a profile and it goes back up. So this is thousands of profiles in this data set here. Um, and especially recently, we've done it a lot in the past too, but over the past few years, we've been more frequently attaching receivers to our gliders. Um, Mostly we're using VR2C, VMT, or RX Live. The RX Live, we get the detections back in real time, and others we can download on recovery. Usually a glider is out for about 30 days at a time. And then once we have that all back, we send it to Kim for the data push. And I think we have about 5 for February. So on the right, there is a map of not all, but a lot of the gliders we've deployed with receivers on board. Our database doesn't go all the way back. We kind of transitioned some stuff a few years ago, and it's not fully populated with the older data sets. Um, but we've had 30 deployments carrying receivers in the Mid-Atlantic Bight since 2020, including one that's out right now. We have at least some coverage over all seasons throughout the year. And there are several more deployments, not all included in this figure, that were deployed previous to 2020, most of them from Rutgers and University of Delaware, with the caveat that that's just with the data that we're managing. I don't know if other groups that we're not aware of. I'm guessing we would know if other groups were deploying gliders with receivers. Um, but for the most part, the data that we're managing, it's Rutgers gliders and University of Delaware has a lot that they're putting out with receivers on board. And we have some deployments in other regions as well, including Antarctica, that were carrying receivers. I think realistically, a lot of the older deployments were down in the Delaware area from Matt Oliver's gliders that just aren't in the newer database, so they didn't make it to this image, but there are a lot of deployments down by Delaware. So our long-term monitoring project plans include the New Jersey Research and Monitoring Initiative, and that's where we basically have gliders out almost year round covering this sawtooth pattern since last spring. And those usually go out with passive acoustics, so they're listening for whales, and active acoustics, so they're measuring zooplankton or fish using echo sounders as well. And pH and dissolved oxygen, they're measuring like the whole suite of things that we can get. And that's basically year-round coverage for, I think, the next couple of years we're doing this pattern. The New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection has been funding 3 deployments a year since 2009 along this green zigzag. And that's monitoring for dissolved oxygen. Not all of those deployments have carried receivers, but since the 2022 deployments, every deployment has carried a receiver. And I think moving forward, we intend to keep putting receivers on all the New Jersey DEP deployments. And then there's a monitoring project funded by NYSERDA on this gray line that I think has a few more deployments planned, some of which will carry receivers. There's also several other projects throughout the region with specific goals that aren't covering the same area every time. I know Matt Oliver has some things planned. So these are our long-term plans. Obviously, mostly New Jersey from Rutgers, but I think there will be some throughout the Bight as well. So one example of an application from Matt Oliver's group, Danielle Halsey did this. What we're deploying is just kind of an added bonus. We're not specifically working with the receiver data yet. It's just added on to environmental monitoring projects, but they deployed with the goal of tracking sand tiger sharks. And she has the glider track here in orange, typical receivers, stationary receivers as the black dots, and sand tiger detections as blue dots. And you can see she's gotten a lot of coverage that would have been missed by these stationary receivers. And because she was also measuring the environmental data along with it as the glider flew up and down and up and down, she was able to match those detections to environmental data where the shark was detected. I think the white lines are her sand tiger shark detections. She got a nice pub out of it, but the University of Delaware group has had some really good research come out of their tagging projects. A note that we have all this glider data. We have a lot of glider data going back a couple decades, but we also are collecting data like Gerhard described earlier through Maricus and Are You Cool from satellites, from HF radar, which is giving us surface currents, some buoys, ocean forecasts, drifter data, gliders we talked about, and weather stations. So we have a lot of data available that these detections can be matched against, whether they're detections from gliders or detections from stationary receivers. And our upcoming projects, we have a graduate student, Scott, who I think is on the call right now, who's planning to link some of our glider detections to satellite-based fronts and water masses. The example on the right is actually using whale detections from an old deployment, but the application would be very much the same. You get a detection and you can see what was the environment like in that area at that time. You have the glider data up in the top right, and bottom left is gradients measured by the MODIS Aqua satellite. So the warmer colors are stronger gradients between different types of water masses. You can see how close was it to a really strong front, um, things like that. And that came out really strong for the whales. So I'm curious to see what might happen looking at fish. Um, so that's happening, and there's potential for other future projects comparing detection locations to environmental data measured by the glider and the other remote sensing and modeling tools that I mentioned in the previous slide. And with that, I can take any questions if there's time.
Thank you, Laura. Does anyone have any questions for her? All right, well, if anything comes up later, you can always